Of course you do. And we're so happy you love the topic because you give us the language um, to be able to gather in this way as such an important figure in the field, particularly with respect to the area of Asian settler colonialism. So I think with that, since we have you in the room, unless you want to kind of settle in a little bit more, as you can see, check out the chat. We have folks joining us from different places. So really exciting to see folks joining us here. Again, just to restate, I'm Robin Rodriguez. I am the founder and executive director for the Amado Kaya Initiative and also Amado Kaya's mama. This lecture series in many ways is inspired by his work. Of course, Amado Kaya, we lost tragically in 2020 when he was working and living alongside indigenous communities in the Philippines who were trying to recover from multiple typhoons, so climate disaster. So this is the second year for this environmental justice and guest lecture series. We co-sponsor this and co-organize this with the Asian American Seed Stewards Project at UC Davis. And yes, the title is We Are Not Immigrants, Unsettling Asians in America. A little bit more background. So what we take the title of this series, and we're really very much inspired by Hawaiian sovereignty activist and professor of Hawaiian studies, Haunani K. Trask's poem, Settler, Not Immigrants, where she's really kind of calling in Asians in Hawaii to really rethink what it means to be, in fact, settlers in the Hawaiian context, but it's equally true here in on Turtle Island. Of course, Native American studies scholar Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz also has a book entitled Not a Nation of Immigrants, where she's also foregrounding the ways in which we are, in fact, complicit in complicated ways in white settler colonialism, and we're being invited to push back against that. So this lecture series is really about holding space for lectures and conversations with Asian American scholars and activists, including those who write about or are actively resisting white settler colonialism in California and beyond through work with indigenous communities, environmental justice, and or land stewardship. So it also holds space for Asian American identified folks, and that is the main audience for AKI and the Asian American Seed Stewards to listen and learn from indigenous peoples and other people of color similarly committed to challenging white settler colonialism in their work. I have to do a plug, y'all. Y'all know things are really falling apart at our institutions. This is the kind of knowledge that they have already deemed, right? Radical indoctrination. This is the kind of this kind of scholars who do this work are people that are being deemed as people who were always unworthy because of DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. So we know that there are ways that funds are being withheld by those who have the power to withhold these funds to invest in these kinds of programs. And we invite y'all to divest yourself from the institutions that don't serve our communities and invest in the kinds of work we're trying to do here through AKI. So take a moment if y'all can scan this and donate so we can continue to do this kind of funding. We really feel fortunate that we kind of exited out of the institution, especially now when things are really becoming very challenging at major universities, that we can hold space in this way. So please continue to support our work. Now, let me get to the juicy part. Dr. Candace Fujikane, who is here joining us today. I'm so honored and just so pleased to be able to connect with Dr. Fujikane in this way. We haven't yet really had much opportunity to connect face to face, but I have been such a big fan of her work for a very long time. And so I just really so excited to be able to hold her, to have her in this space to talk about Asian settler activism in an era of climate change. So appropriate for our lecture series. Dr. Fujikane is a Japanese settler on Kanaka Maoli lands. She's an English professor at the University of Hawaiʻi. In 2000, she 2000, she co-edited with Jonathan Okamura a special issue of Amerasia Journal on Asian settler colonialism. So 25 years, y'all, that this work has been happening in this area. So that particular issue was expanded into Asian settler colonialism, from local governance to the habits of everyday life in Hawaii. Her book, Mapping Abundance for Planetary Future, Kanaka Maoli and Critical Settler Cartographies in Hawaii, which I love, by the way. I mean, oh, it's like been mind blowing for me as I've been doing my own work on the land. So that was published in Duke University Press in 2021. And she's working on her new book, Elemental Cartographies for a Changing Earth. Thank you so much, Dr. Fujikane. Of course, thank you so much for just rushing over from one thing to this. Hope you got a chance to get to take a deep breath. So I'm gonna stop sharing and hand it all over to you.
This is so I am a big fan of yours, Robin. I think we first met, maybe might have been over the blues hanging controversy in 1997.
Actually, you know what, Candace, I couldn't make it then. I was pregnant
Oh,
actually
but I
with a
kept seeing
motto
you.
at the time, probably because I was always,
Yeah.
around.
But I know we've been in this Asian American studies field together for a really long
Yes.
time. So
Yes, 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 yes. And looking forward to actually what this can give rise to, because you have really been so instrumental on my own journey as I've really not just transitioned out of the university, but transitioned to doing this land work and stewardship. So,
amazing.
I've been learning so much from you.
I feel that this series is such a beautiful way of honoring your son, who was an amazing person. And I just love that you are on the land, working the land, and yet doing these amazing series. So you're taking the best of multiple worlds and doing something really, I think, there's a lot of world building in what you're doing. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh
Thank you
my
so
gosh. Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you so,
Yeah.
so much. Really looking forward to hearing from
Thank you. So I'm gonna share screen, and I'm sorry, don't mind my messy desktop, but I really enjoyed putting this together because although Asian settler colonialism can be a very depressing topic to see like how our own people betray us, it's also a way to look at Asian settlers as activists and what we can do to support Kanaka Maoli and other indigenous peoples. So, when I was putting this together, I was thinking about, I know land acknowledgements are super controversial, but I wanted to say how grateful I am to the Padawin people for on whose land we're having this conversation. And I believe that land back is climate justice. So, we think about Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang saying that true decolonization is not a metaphor, but it is about the rematriation of land, and that has to be the focus of a decolonial project. So I love, thinking about Land Back, the Indian Initiative, and this is Nick Tilson interviewing Madonna Thunderbolt, and it's just amazing to see where they have taken that project, and so that they can actually buy land around contested areas so that they have standing in court. And I wanted to draw a connection between that and the land back movement at Kauaula in Lahaina, where there was the devastating fire. But for years, they have been working to regain the Kuleana lands, and they've been getting their land back through the American court system. So that's quite an accomplishment. When the American political system cannot deny your claims to your lands and must reaward you the lands that developers are trying to build into multi-million-dollar estates with infinity pools when Lahaina cannot sustain that kind of use of water. So I'm sorry, I'm just gonna set my timer real quick because I know I have 30 minutes and I don't wanna go overtime because I easily go overtime. Okay, so going to the next slide. Oh, hmm. Now what's happening here? Oh, you're okay. Not sure. Something is happening. I can't.
Oh, let's see.
Next. There we
Oh,
go.
there you
I'll just
go.
use the
You
arrow. I'll
got
just
it.
use
Okay,
the
okay.
arrow. So my teacher, I have Haunani K. Trask on the one side of me, who taught us that we are Asian settlers. And then on the other side, I have Kikuhi, who is a master chanter. And she teaches me about the importance of ceremony. So I have both of these teachers in mind. And Kikuhi says that in order to establish or grow a relationship with our places, we have to gain an intimate knowledge of that place. So my family comes from Fukushima, Niigata, the Abe family. So I'm a Japanese settler. They settled in Paia, Maui, like a lot of other plantation workers. And this is where I live now. And so she says, these places, you have to think about how they make you up on a molecular level. They become a very part of your physical being through the water you drink and the air you breathe and the soil that ends up in your lungs and in your body. So there's that aspect to honoring the elements. So I wanted to say that in the classroom and in public, I identify as a Japanese settler, but when I'm in ceremony, I am myself in my highest and best form. So I wanted people to kind of chew on that and think about how we can use the term settler strategically to further indigenous struggles. Okay, so Ohea Uli Ku'ukulaiwi. So Hea Uli is my beloved land, and I love the word ku'u because it shows that it's not a piece of property, but it is my beloved, just as we would say my beloved grandmother. This is Kiahiakahoi, where my water comes from, and this is the Kaniko'o rains that fall on Hea, Hea Uli. This is my beloved rain. And I didn't, and so talking about establishing a relationship with the elements, I didn't know why it was called the kaniko rain, which means the tapping sound of a cane. It represents living to a ripe old age. And when I was sitting outside while it was raining, I listened to the rain falling on my kalo leaves, which had a distinctive tapping sound. And so I thought about it. Oh, it is the rain falling on the kalo leaves that makes the tapping sound that reminds us that we want to live or that we want to live into our old age. This is the kai, my kai, kavaha o kamano, which is the mouth of the shark. And if you become intimate with your elements and you learn about them, there is less to be afraid of in the world. So kavaho kamano, the mouth of the shark, is called that name because the reefs that fringe the bay are shaped like the rows of teeth in a shark's mouth. And what this means is when there is an earthquake north of us, and the tidal waves, we get the tsunami warnings. Uh, these reefs protect us from tsunamis on my side of the island. So that's one less thing to worry about. So my book, Mapping Abundance for Planetary Future, is premised on the idea that David Lloyd put forth in a talk at a Critical Ethnic Studies Association conference, where he talked about how capital fears abundance. And I love thinking about capital and its vulnerability. And when we think about abundance, capital promises imaginary plenitude, but in truth, it depends on creating hunger or unmet needs. I think, so in order to create markets, I think iPhone tapped upon, a really old but kind of it's an idea that works for capital. Create an iPhone with just a little change, and everyone will want it and will buy continuously. You can use the same market, and that market is sort of self-sustaining. It'll keep buying your product, and that's really problematic. It's like the McPherson strut, the car part that was made to break so that you'd always have to buy a new one. It's a very old concept. True abundance, by contrast, feeds for generations. So rather than seeing, this is really important, rather than seeing climate change as apocalyptic, we can see how climate change events are bringing about the demise of capitalist economies of scarcity, making way for indigenous economies of abundance. So, if capitalist economies are based on creating markets, indigenous economies of abundance are based on the growth of food. It's a land-based form of governance that prioritizes the health of the land and the elements around you. Oh, so I wrote it twice, I guess because it's so important. So anyway, yes, indigenous economies of abundance and land and elementally based governance. That is what, um, that is the hope for indigenous economies. Now, my teacher, Kekuhi, her mother is Dr. Kanaka Ole Kanahele, and she taught us that elements, the akua, are not deities in the Greek Western sense of gods, but they are the elements. So there are 400,000 akua, or elemental forms and natural processes. And an example would be Laka, the deity of hula, is the breath of plants and the natural process of evapotranspiration. And she's the deity of hula because when you have a hula halau in a room with mirrors, in a studio with mirrors, their breath condenses on the mirrors. So they are literally becoming the plants whose breath becomes the clouds and the rain. There are other deities. Another one of my favorites is Hina Lua Iko'a, Hina who vomits or produces coral, and that is the process of coral spawning. And her partner is Kukeapua, the rising motion of the coral gametes. So masculine energies are rising, feminine energies are sort of more like spreading out over the land. And what this shows us is the importance of pilina, and that is the connectedness between Kani of the fresh waters and Kanaloa, the deep consciousness of the ocean, and the Kanaka, the people. And Noelani Punivai, she's actually kind of like, I think she's an oceanographer. So she's a scientist, a Kanaka Maoli scientist. And she reminds us, this is what she said on Mauna Kea at one of the Pu'uhuluhulu University classes. They held classes on the lava flats by professors, by fishermen, by farmers. Farmers led classes on understanding the moon phases to, and the importance of moon phases to farming. And she said at that in that classroom out on the lava flats at Mauna Kea, if you know your akua, if you are pili or connected to your akua, if you have aloha for your akua and understand their functions, you will know how to work with them and how to respond to them. When we know our akua, we can call their names and activate them and ourselves. And that idea of activation is so critical because we activate the elements through chants, and through honoring the elements, we feed the elements ava, that's a drink, and we also uh, activate ourselves by achieving a higher form of consciousness when we call out to them. So the reason why the reason why it's important to think about elements in relation to each other is this one thing that I learned from this document, Kiho'iho'i Kanawai, which is a beautiful document that shows how you can steward 21 horizontal realms of an island. And so she argues that Kanawai Kanemilohai, or actually I think it's Kanawai Ho'okiki, the Edict of, oh, I guess this is Kanemilohai, the Edict of Passage, the ability for groundwater and underground water specifically to have uninterrupted passage. For health of islands, as fresh, cool waters deter hurricanes from decimating islands. And I thought about it and I was like, let's find a map showing the path of hurricanes over time. And as you can see, what happens is Um, Kane is the cold waters that flow underground and emerge as springs. And we have a lot of springs that open up into the ocean. And these springs create freshwater sources where people could go, who were out fishing, could just dive down and fill their water gourds with drinkable water. So those cold waters create a cold water perimeter around the island. So when hurricanes come barreling over the Pacific, they veer north or they veer south. Very rarely do they cross over the islands. Only Iniki and Iva were the ones that we were most hit by. I think tropical depression, there's one that goes through the islands, but they're not as severe as hurricanes. So when we think about the importance of fresh water reaching the ocean, when in the 1990s, scientists would actually say water that goes out to the ocean is worse than wasted. That was the saying at the state legislature until people talked about how freshwater meeting saltwater creates the estuaries that feed the baby fish. They become nurseries for baby fish and for a lot of the phytoplankton and the basic building blocks of life. And in this story, also about how it protects us from hurricanes. But the state is often short-sighted, and unless they can see dollar signs, they often disregard ancestral knowledge. This is the document I mentioned, the Kiho'iho'i Kanawai. This is available online, and it's really fascinating to see how they've established these different realms of stewardship and how that was gleaned from Mele chant, um, and the kind of ancestral wisdom or Ike Kupuna. Settlers. So as settlers, we have choices. And Haunani K. Trask, I love that what Robin said about Dr. Trask is that she was calling people in, not calling people out. I think so many people were defensive about being identified as settlers that they saw her as calling them out. But she said there's an old Union song, and the question it poses is, whose side are you on? And as settlers, we always have a choice. We can align our interests with indigenous peoples, because as Robin was saying, uh, the indigenous peoples have the most sustainable ways of living because they have stewarded land in Hawaii for over 25 generations and then on the continent for thousands of years. So, as we are structurally positioned by these simultaneities, we always have a choice. We can always choose to be settler allies. This also means an opposition to all forms of oppression mobilized by the settler state, including anti-Black racism, heteronormativity and heteropatriarchy, Islamophobia, what Rob Nixon refers to as the slow violence of the environmentalism of the poor. So I see the term settler as having a capaciousness. What we have to do is change that term. So when we say settler, it doesn't automatically mean someone who is exploiting the land, but it can also mean those who stand for the land. Now, in my book, Mapping Abundance, I use the term settler aloha aina, but it proved to be very controversial. So I got the term from Noelani Goodyear Kaupua, who talked about how Asian settler aloha aina might be another way of thinking about the love um, that settlers have for land. At the same time, they recognize the settler privileges they derive from that land. But when I started using it in my book, Kanaka Maoli stepped forward and said that term, aloha aina, is our term, our genealogy through the Kumulipo to our descent from land itself. So it's not appropriate for you to use that term. So I was like, okay, I can drop that term. I will just call myself a settler, not even an ally, because there's something presumptuous about calling yourself an ally, but you can think about yourself as an ally and what can you do as an ally. So I call myself a Japanese settler. And I do that to engage settler occupation. As I said, I use it strategically. So if I'm in a room full of people at an Office of Hawaiian Affairs meeting, um, what can happen is there was a Korean mayor of Hawaii Island. His name was Harry Kim, and he had a vision for Mauna Kea that included the TMT, the 30-meter telescope. And so we were very upset about his vision. So we are in this meeting, and I say to him, Mayor Kim, you look like my dad. You actually look like my uncles. And that's the point, is that we are settlers here, and it's not for us to have a vision for Mauna Kea when Kanaka Maoli have had 25 generations of stewardship of Mauna Kea. And that, so I feel like that was the most strategic use of the term. I've used it in other ways as well, but that to me gives it a kind of political edge. And so I wanted to also remind everyone that we have Asian settler elder activists who have been doing this work long before us. Gwen Kim, Ronald Fujiyoshi, and Steve Takayama are Asian settlers who have been staunch supporters of Hawaiian political independence. And they've stood for Mauna Kea in the most wonderful ways. This is Gwen Kim on the front line. So Native Hawaiian elders chose to stand on the front line. There was a big banner in front of them that said, "Road closed due to desecration." And this is the role of the kupuna who sat bundled up in blankets in wheelchairs and in their chairs to protect the Mauna. They said they wanted to be on the front line to protect their descendants. They knew that we would be treated more, younger people would be treated more like what happened at Standing Rock. And Standing Rock was very much in our minds at this time. We had nonviolent direct action training so that we knew how to act, but ever mindful of their descendants, the kupuna chose to be arrested first. But they were not arrested. And only later, on the third day, did they get arrested. And at that time, they were taken from their tents. They were wheeled, or they were led by their walkers and wheelchairs into the paddy wagon where their wrists were zip tied. And they were saying, "What are we going to do? We're not trying to escape. You don't have to zip tie our wrists." It was just kind of, we were all sitting there with tears streaming down our faces. And it was just so amazing to see kupuna. They taught us how to be kupuna. They taught us how to be elders. And here's Gwen Kim again with Merle Pak and Sylvia Thompson, all Korean American women who were arrested on November 15, 2019, when they were trying to put in the wind farms that were too harmful to the community. So wind farms have a flicker effect. It's devastating for people with epilepsy. It often causes things like nausea and headaches. And the wind turbines were located less than 1,500 feet from the nearest schools. So if a blade shears off and flies, the setback is supposed to be a mile. On most places in the United States, the setback is 1 mile. But in this particular case in Kahuku, which is a largely Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian community, the setback was only 1,500 feet, and the actual turbines were 1,300 feet from the nearest school. And this is Ronald Fujiyoshi, and I remember seeing these mugshots and saying to myself, who is this Japanese guy? Now he could have been mixed race, but I called him up to ask him about why he got arrested, and he's just an amazing person who really recognizes what settler colonialism is. He said that he had met there's a homeless woman who called him dad. He became like her kind of surrogate dad, and he took her he she asked him to take her to the courthouse because he's actually a good form of protection because he's Japanese, and they treat him differently. He escorted her to the courthouse, and she said to him, "Dad, look at this." And there were all these posters with the images of judges who've won awards, and they were all Japanese. And he says right there, he realized that we have to do something to change this perception of Japanese as enforcing settler law and of buying up indigenous lands. So that's Ronald Fujiyoshi. And so, what can we do as settlers? I like to think positively about things. Um, now, the Kanaka Ole Kanaheles teach us that we can think about every life we take, it's a life for our life. So when we harvest, we give our breath in chant to thank the plants, the plant people. We can give our breath in testimony, and we can give our breath in labor in Lo'ikalo, taro pond fields, or, oh, sorry, this should be Lokoi'a for the fish ponds, and Awai, the restoration of waterways. I wanted to mention that spirituality is a key part of the struggle for land back. Ceremony feeds our spirits and helps us to continue on. We have to realize that struggles are intergenerational. It doesn't just end with one fight, there's always another fight. So, in order for us to make the struggle intergenerational, we have to learn how to be in native places. So, engaging in ceremony is not about wanting to be indigenous, it's about learning how to be in native places, being more well informed. And I think this is a crucial idea because in conservation management practices, they are now including ritual into those practices. Okay, so we also have to stretch our imaginations to work simultaneously on two fronts. We fight the settler state on its terms, imaginatively, and second, we live in the present to live in the present, a world beyond the settler state. So we don't have to wait for decolonization as a formal process to happen or deoccupation by the settler state. We can live that life right now. What would I do if Hawaii were politically independent? That is exactly how people who work at fish ponds and lo'ikalo, that is exactly how they think. They don't wait for permission or federal recognition. In fact, when the Department of the Interior came to Hawaii, 90% of people testified against federal recognition. Okay, so testifying, I mentioned in the first part, we can give our breath in testimony. And testimony really important. It's something that we can do as settlers in very toxic environments. So I'm gonna have to mute myself so I can tell my son that I'm recording. Ha ha ha. Okay. Yeah. All right. So testifying is often toxic because we go into these state rooms with no windows and we have to prove that Native Hawaiians have a right to water or prove that there should be a Native Hawaiian on the Water Commission. And it's really toxic. So wherever we can do that kind of work is important because Kanaka Maoli who are working in their lo'ikalo, it's really hard work and they're envisioning and making possible um, political independence. So the least that we can do is hold space for them in uh, in these state agency rooms and in front of the legislature or the land use commission or the commission on water resource management. So I testify a lot. I like to do research and I like presenting research in my testimony. A lot of things to say about testimony, but um, also, I don't want young people to get arrested. But us old people, I have a vision of all these professors standing in front of Mauna Kea getting arrested. Because for me, it's not a big thing to get arrested. Because in Hawaii, we have a community bail fund that helps bail us out. Once our charges are most often dismissed, the money goes back into the community bail fund. Under the Trump administration, we're seeing much more uh, like unthinkable, atrocious tactics of, they say it's not deportation, it's human trafficking. Yeah, it's human trafficking. Um, in a way that has no due process. So I'm saying in Hawaii, it's been a certain way, and getting arrested, being on the front lines was a way to hold space. I think I would continue to do it. So when I went to the wind farms, remember where Gwen Kim had gotten arrested, I talked to a woman who said that she had been arrested twice, and that night would have been her third night. So I told her, I will hold space for you. You can sit this one out, and I will get arrested in your place. And that was the first time I was arrested. And it's really like for me an educational opportunity, to learn what it's like. Okay, and when we testify, not only can we testify on legislative efforts, but we also need to think about within the state. We're fighting within the state and beyond the state. Within the state, the Water Commission has to be independent from governor appointments, because governor appointments, oh my gosh, we just saw a terrible case where the governor tried to appoint a a Kanaka Maoli who was close friends with the developer. Now he had bypassed the formal nomination process, so immediately Earth Justice filed a lawsuit against the governor for failing to follow due process. Actually, the protocol of how you follow through with these kinds of nominations. So beyond the settler state, there is a world making process that includes art and vision. This is based on kilo and adapting to changes in the world, working with the elements, not against the elements. So there are, my teacher Kikuhi talks about the cloud people, the mountain people, grandmother wind, grandfather tree. If we see the world like that in a grammar of animacy, that's Robin Wall Kimmerer's term, we can act more responsibly in this world. So there's a lot of things we can do as Asian settlers. We can rethink scalability. So this is my son, Ty, here. There we were rebuilding an awai, which is a waterway. So because of post-flood events, that's a climate change event. Post-flood events wrecked the wall of the lo'i and flooded the lo'i. So we were helping to rebuild the wall. We have to rethink scalability. So it's not about there being one solution to all of our problems of climate change. What's going to happen is it takes all of these networks of local restoration projects, all connected and learning from each other, that's going to enable us to survive. The earth will survive. The question is whether we will survive. And oh, I love these photographs. Community work days in Hawaii are a really wonderful opportunity for people to grow their relationship with these elements. So this one is building a stone wall at Paipai Ohe'ea, and I learned so much from the lessons of building a stone wall, such as the big Niho stones have to be held in place by smaller Unu stones. So we can be the Unu stones, the support stones for the Niho stones. This is really cool to think about. How is it that we can support Kanaka Maoli? And this one is of an event in Waimanalo where we braided limu, and this was to plant. This is how you plant limu or seaweed, edible seaweed. You make a lei and you wrap it around a rock, and then you plant the rock outside of a rock wall, like a turtle enclosure or a fish pond wall. And so before we put, this is where we put all of our mana into the rocks that we put into place. And that becomes part of the planting process, is to have our mana travel into the ocean so that the spores from these seaweed can travel far down the coastline in ways that we can't even imagine. And so this is my limule, and this is my son Tai also braiding his limu, and he really got into it. This is the pahonu, the turtle enclosure. And these are, I don't know if you know Joseph Hahn, famous writer of Nuclear Family. He came out, I, invited him. I say, hey, let's go to this limu braiding and planting session. And this is his partner, Samantha Ikehara. And so now they're both professors at UH. Joseph is in the creative writing department in our English department, and Sam is in the American Studies department. So these are all examples of Asian settlers doing meaningful work. And there's art as well. Whenever we learn how to make kapa, so I learned how to make bark cloth. It involves understanding the planting of Wākea, of chants to encourage the growth of the Wākea, to thank the Wākea trees, for the harvest and many other things. And I also take a lot of pictures because it helps me to process elemental events. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop sharing there. And I really welcome questions, and I would love you to ask me like really hard questions, like how have I been criticized or stuff like that. I like hard.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But so, so, so grateful for this beautiful, beautiful talk. Thank you so much. I
Thank
have lots of questions for you, but before I jump in, there's already a really good question in the chat. So
Yes.
the question from Aaron is, what advice do
Oh,
you have for scientists that have a harder time embracing spirituality and animism in land stewardship and management?
that's an excellent question. And so there's an article that Kikuhi wrote with scientists on the importance of ritual. And I'm gonna share, I could Google it. Oh, I know what it is. I can give you the title of it right now because I have a folder called Kikuhi. And oops, I don't know why it's not. Oh, here, it's called, uh, there's two articles. One is called Embracing the Sacred, an Indigenous Framework for Tomorrow's Sustainability Science. I love it, right? I love it. She's co-writing with scientists about the sacred, and another one on ritual called um, Biocultural Stewardship, Indigenous and Local Ecological Knowledge. Oh, that's a different one. And the Urban Crucible. She has so many articles, and they're all available online. So I would encourage you to check her out. Um, and the thing is that there are many indigenous scientists now who are working on this particular issue. They're working to have the sacred be recognized by science. And so many of them are working, like there's a student, I know a student in our department who's doing like really fabulous work on Zizek and theorizing philosophically the importance of Noah and Kapu, what is forbidden and what is free, as a way of ethical human action. So there are people doing all of this kind of work. And when I testify in front of scientists, I always say, um, what is the highest um, ethical principle in scholarship? And that is to do no harm. So we shouldn't harm a mountain. We shouldn't have our students being arrested because they want to protect a sacred mountain. So to me, we fill out all of these IRB forms, right? For doing interviews with vulnerable subjects. That's what they do in the sciences, and yet they trample all over people who are standing to protect the mountain. So, so seek out other scientists, Kanaka Maoli and indigenous scientists who are doing that kind of work of land stewardship. If you're ever interested in joining her class, it's called Halau Ohia. So I'm typing it in the chat, Halau Ohia, and you can go to it. I think it's .com. It might be .org or .com. I can't remember. It's her nonprofit organization, and halauohia.org. You could just type it out without any of the diacritical marks. And it explains, she has an ecological kinship class where she teaches scientists how to think in terms of Kanaka Maoli lifeways. So one of the people in my cohort, her name is Rosie Allegado. She's a microbiologist, and she retermed sea level rise. She doesn't call it sea level rise as in an antagonistic relationship with the ocean. She calls it Kanaloa is coming. How shall we greet him? And that is a completely different way of thinking about sea level rise. Oh, thank you, Anna. You're so on it. Great question. Oh wow, you guys put all this really cool stuff in here. And yes,
Yeah.
that Rano Fujiyoshi, he's the one organizing against settler colonialism in evangelical churches. I love him. He traveled
Yeah.
throughout Asia and he said, every country I went to, I respected their religion and I came to understand their religions. Why is it in Hawaii that the state cannot recognize Hawaiian religion? And so when he was arrested on the Mauna, the judge wanted to dismiss his charges. And he's like, no, I want to go to trial. I want this to be on record. Why is the state of Hawaii unable to recognize Kanaka Maoli's religion? And so he's not in it for the quick release. He's in it to argue to set legal precedent for why Mauna Kea is sacred. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to wait a little while to see if there are any other questions. We definitely have a lot of resources as we were listening to you, Dr. Fujikani, just kind of populating the chat with resources for folks not familiar with certain, things like the Wayne and Tuck piece, for example, depending on
Yeah.
the folks who are here in the space, and
Yeah.
the just Joseph Han's
Oh my gosh,
website.
his novel is so awesome. You know what? He talks about Asians as settlers in Hawaii, and he does it so beautifully that my students, they love, they're writing papers on this passage where he talks about the problems with the term local and how we're really settlers. He's brilliant. It's a
Oh,
brilliant
thank you
novel.
so much for that. I would love to see how that prompt, well, where, what piece of writing and that prompt as we kind
Yeah.
of, so we can also invite folks who have attended today or people who weren't able to attend that we're able to share this lecture with to kind of do that self-study and consideration. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of the resources here. Even the oral history with Gwen Kim, apparently there was this oral history done, so many resources, and we really
Yeah.
like to encourage folks to continue this study. That one of the things that we'll offer up to folks afterwards, if they just kind of want to hold space for collective study on this topic, that we will try to hold space for that if there's interest. Let's see if there's another. Oh yeah, just people super excited about the resource share and really resonating with everything shared today. I'm going to actually, I wonder if I have so many questions for you, and I know we're going to keep on,
Yeah.
Dr. Fujikani, to kind of have a one-on-one conversation. Y'all can listen to that after,
Yeah.
but for now, I actually really wanted to talk to you maybe in the last few minutes that we have together.
Yeah.
Um, your work is just, it's so beautiful and so powerful. I wonder to what extent in your own work as an educator, as a university professor, um, to what extent do you bring ceremony or ritual or a sense of sacredness, even as you kind of to set the space or the intention in the
Yeah.
space you hold for learning? I mean, I've had the wonderful privilege to be in space to listen to you talk. And
Oh,
when so of course here too in this virtual space, but I've
yeah.
always appreciated how you approach. But I kind of would love to hear you share that if you don't mind.
That's a great question. So it is a bit controversial. There are hardcore people who believe that Native, like if you're not Native, you should not be taught the chants. So what Pualani and her mother, Edith Kanaka Ole, did was they wrote chants specifically for everybody that were free and Noah so that everyone could chant it. And because they wrote it, it's not a use of an ancient chant. And they had full right to teaching it. And so I taught Ehomai in my class. And I told them, it was a Literatures of Hawaii class. And I said, you should know one chant. And I didn't fully explain the whole thing about how Edith Kanaka Ole knew that at some point the people would need chants to sustain the earth. And so I did get an evaluation where a student said, I don't think it's appropriate for Dr. Fujikane to be teaching chants in class because those are only for us native people. So I realized, oh, you have to explain really carefully that a lot of the chants that we do for Halau Ohia have been written by Kikuhi, her husband Tangaro, and her mother, so that they are free and Noah for us to share with other people. She has another article called Cultivating Sacred Kimchi. And in that article, she shares a chant that she wrote, which is a really beautiful chant about how we imagine knowledge to be floating like seeds, like ohia seeds on the wings of the wind, settling here and there, taking root and growing and bringing back the native birds. And it's a way for us to use our our imaginative process of imaging to manifest. Unless you can see a future, it's hard to work towards that future. So that kind of fertility and abundance is a very much a part of these chant processes. So after that comment, I was a little bit more hesitant about, I was thinking, well, ceremony oftentimes it's for like we do aha for focused things like for solstice or for equinoxes. So I was like, maybe it has to be tied to an event. But ehomai, I should go back to reteaching that because I think students really. Another student who was also Hawaiian said, I have never had an English class where we could chant Ehomai, and I am so grateful. So, very different responses to being able to chant because I honestly believe that when I chant Ehomai, I'm opening, it's like a formal process of opening up your mind to receive information and to really interrogate, oh, why is this thing coming into my life at this point? And what is the meaning? How can I make this work? And there's so many times where I've said no to things, and then I realize, oh, that would have given me the knowledge I need to work on this other project. So anyway, yeah, ceremony is super important. But anyway, great question.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And I think one last one. My
Okay.
folks will have to maybe linger past the hour, but I
Oh,
also feel like it was such a hopeful story. I
yeah.
remember you told this story last year at the
Oh,
AAAS when you were
yeah.
talking about the book, and I think it's in your introduction, and it
Yeah.
really is a story about the scale of change. Meaning, you were kind of talking to a Hawaiian elder who's really kind of speaking to different kinds of land and water stewardship work, right? Just
Yeah.
really kind of, inviting a very different way of thinking about these seemingly small scale
Yeah.
projects and what their impact can be. And I was wondering if you could tell the story again, because I
Frozen.
really found it super compelling and inspiring, and maybe a really nice way to close out this talk. And then you and I will transition with just our
Yeah.
own one-on-one.
Thank you. Yeah. This was an uncle who was a kalo farmer, and he said, we have to connect the dots. He says, we're each involved in our struggles and we have important victories, but unless we share those victories, we don't know what each other's going through. And he was talking about a victory we had in Waianae where we actually beat a developer at his own game. He wanted to buy all of this agricultural land and then have it rezoned for urban use so that he could turn a profit. And so the community stood up and we testified. And in the end, they denied his permit. And it was a beautiful way for people to learn how to testify. We learned the process of land commission use. But not only did that benefit Waianae, but Danny in on the other side of the island at Waiahole took that victory as his own and says, look, here is another victory of our people in standing for our land, keeping sacred land. That land that they wanted to build the industrial park on was the birthplace of Maui. And so we were able to, and it's so funny, like how developers think. They're like, well, tell us where he was born and we'll make a 10-foot easement around his birthplace. And the auntie said, Maui is that mountain profile you see in the distance. He was not born at a street address because he's the size of a mountain. And I love it, you know. So I'm glad I live in a place where the sacred, people make, you know, people honor the sacred because it teaches us, right? Those of us who grew up in a capitalist economy, how to honor the sacred. So thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so, so much. And I think with that, that comes, we close out this kind of collective container for learning. And then you and I think we'll stay on. So thank you all who joined us in this Zoom room. We will definitely push out compile resources that were mentioned, or kind of resources to that might help you, just additional references that were mentioned in the talk that might be helpful to folks in a follow-up email once we get the recording done. So I think what we'll do, Candace, is like, let's step out of the room
Okay.
and then come back again with everybody out.
All right. Sounds
All right.
good.
Thank you. Have a good rest
Thank
of your days, or
you.
everybody, for
Thank you for
wherever
being
y'all are
here.
joining. And I'll see you in a bit.
Thank you. So nice to see all of you.